I bought my family's home from the bank after they fraudulently sold mine. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. I'm not your landlord, Mom. I'm your eviction notice. The words hung in the crisp morning air, sharper than the sprawling wrought iron gates of the estate behind me. I stood on the pristine, imported marble steps of the $3 million megamansion she had bought with my stolen life. Sheriff Miller stood a few paces back, his hand resting casually on his duty belt, a silent testament to the fact that this wasn't a family visit. This was a legal, binding reckoning. My mother, Barbara, stared at me through the crack in the custom mahogany double doors. She was wearing her signature silk robe, a fresh blowout framing her perfectly contoured face. Next to her stood my older brother, Kevin, looking like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive freight train. He still had that arrogant, golden child smirk permanently etched into his features, but it was rapidly faltering as his eyes darted from my face to the thick, court-stamped envelope clutched tightly in my right hand. For 7 agonizing years, I had dreamed of this exact moment. 7 years of eating cheap noodles, sleeping in a freezing car, and working myself to the bone while they lived in the absolute lap of luxury, funded entirely by my blood, sweat, and stolen equity. My name is Sophia. I am 32 years old, and today, I am entirely self-made. But I had to build myself twice. The first time, I built a modest, quiet, honest life. I bought a small, beautiful starter home in the suburbs, totally unaware that the people who were supposed to protect me were actively plotting to strip it away. They didn't just borrow money from me. They didn't just ask for a familial favor. They executed a calculated, cold-blooded financial assassination. Barbara and Kevin stole exactly $185,000 of my hard-earned equity. They forged a notary stamp, completely abused a power of attorney I didn't even know I had signed, and sold my house out from under me just to bankroll this grotesque monument to their bottomless ego. They assumed I was weak. They thought I would just disappear into the shadows, a quiet, broken casualty of their insatiable greed. They thought I would accept my fate and never fight back. They underestimated the rage of a daughter who had absolutely nothing left to lose. Standing here now, looking at the absolute terror flooding their eyes, I felt a deep, chilling sense of peace wash over my soul. The scales of justice were finally tipping back. I watched the color drain from her perfectly lifted face. To understand how we ended up on that marble porch, you have to understand the blind, foolish loyalty I had in my 20s. Back then, I was 25, working 60-hour weeks at a logistics firm, aggressively saving every single penny. While Kevin was busy launching his third failed startup, funded entirely by Barbara's dwindling savings, I was quietly building a foundation. I bought a charming 3-bedroom starter home in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't a mansion, but it was mine. I painted the walls, planted a garden, and felt a profound sense of pride. I believed in the illusion of our family unit. Barbara always played the role of the devoted matriarch, meticulously managing the family's image. "Family is everything, Sophia," she would say, sipping wine on my back patio, her eyes calculating the square footage. "Have you ever looked at your own mother and realized you were just a walking bank account to her?" I hadn't. Not yet. The trap was set during tax season. Barbara, who had previously worked in real estate and financial administration, offered to help me file my paperwork. "Just standard deductions, honey," she had purred, sliding a thick stack of documents across my dining table. "Sign the highlighted tabs so I can submit this to the accountant tomorrow." I was exhausted from a double shift. I trusted her implicitly. Why wouldn't I? She was my mother. I didn't read the fine print. I didn't notice the general power of attorney slipped between the 1040 forms. I didn't see the document granting her full legal authority to manage, sell, or transfer my real estate assets. I simply signed my name, blindly handing over the keys to my entire life. Months went by. I continued paying my mortgage, totally oblivious to the fact that Barbara and Kevin were actively shopping for a luxury estate in the hills. They needed a massive down payment to secure their dream home, and Kevin's credit was completely shot. They saw my little house not as my sanctuary, but as their personal, untapped ATM. They had the paperwork, they had the forged notary connection, and they had a buyer lined up. All they needed was for me to leave town for a few days so they could close the deal in the shadows. My naive trust was the weapon they used to destroy me. The shattering of my reality happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had just returned from a grueling 5-day business trip in Chicago, dragging my suitcase up the familiar concrete walkway of my starter home. I was exhausted, dreaming of my own bed. But as I reached the front porch, I froze. The heavy brass doorknob I had meticulously picked out was gone, replaced by a cheap, generic silver lock. A massive moving truck was backed into my driveway, and unfamiliar voices echoed from inside my living room. Panic seized my chest. I pounded on the door, my heart hammering furiously against my ribs. A middle-aged man in a flannel shirt answered, looking utterly bewildered by my presence. "Excuse me, who are you?" I demanded, my voice trembling with adrenaline. "What are you doing in my house?" The man frowned, pulling a thick folder from the entryway table. "Your house? Lady, we just closed on this property yesterday. We bought it from Barbara and Kevin. Here's the deed." He held up a pristine, legally binding piece of paper. The room spun wildly. I snatched the document, my eyes darting across the ink. There it was, a special warranty deed, transferring the title of my home to these strangers. Attached to it was a copy of the power of attorney, the very same document I had signed under the guise of routine tax paperwork. My mother had used it to legally represent me at closing. The forged notary stamp glared back at me, a neon sign of their betrayal. I stumbled backward off the porch, the rain soaking through my clothes. I pulled out my phone and dialed Barbara's number, my fingers shaking violently. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed Kevin. Voicemail. They had orchestrated this entire transaction while I was out of state, quietly absorbing the $185,000 of equity I had meticulously built over 3 years. They liquidated my sanctuary to line their own pockets, leaving me standing on the wet sidewalk with nothing but a suitcase and a dead cell phone. The sheer, calculated malice of it took my breath away. I wasn't just robbed. I was erased by the very people who shared my blood. I was officially homeless, and my own mother was the architect. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my freezing car in a strip mall parking lot, clutching the copied deed the new owners had graciously let me photograph before asking me to leave. At dawn, I drove straight to the luxury apartment Kevin was renting. I pounded on the door until his neighbor threatened to call the cops. Finally, the door swung open. Barbara was sitting on Kevin's velvet sofa, sipping a latte as if it were a perfectly normal Wednesday morning. Kevin stood in the doorway, looking annoyed rather than guilty. I burst past him, waving the digital photos of the deed in their faces. "You sold my house. You stole my home." I screamed, the raw agony tearing at my throat. Barbara calmly set her mug down and sighed, adopting the condescending tone she reserved for unruly children. "Oh, Sophia, stop being so dramatic," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "We didn't steal anything. We repurposed the family assets. We needed the money to secure the down payment for the new estate in the hills. It's an upgrade for all of us." I stared at her, completely paralyzed by the sheer audacity of her delusion. "Repurposed? That was my house. I paid the mortgage. You forged a notary and stole $185,000. Kevin scoffed, crossing his arms aggressively. "You signed the POA, idiot. It's totally legal. Besides, you'll get a room in the new mansion. We're doing this for the family legacy. My new business needs a respectable address to attract investors, and your little shack wasn't doing anyone any good." The gaslighting was suffocating. They genuinely believed their desire for a lavish, ostentatious lifestyle completely overrode my right to own property. They viewed me as a mere stepping stone, a sacrificial lamb for their insatiable vanity. "I am going to the police," I whispered, my voice dripping with pure venom. "I am going to put you both in prison for fraud." Barbara just laughed, a cold, empty sound that chilled me to the bone. "Go ahead, sweetie. You signed the paperwork. Good luck proving you didn't know what it was." Their smug, remorseless faces would haunt my nightmares for years to come. Barbara's chilling confidence wasn't entirely misplaced. I spent the next 3 weeks trapped in a bureaucratic nightmare that slowly drained the last of my sanity and resources. I walked into the local police precinct, armed with the forged documents and the timeline of their deception. The detective listened sympathetically, but his conclusion felt like a physical blow to the stomach. "Because you signed the power of attorney, this isn't a clear-cut criminal theft," he explained wearily. It's a highly complex civil matter. You'll have to sue them in civil court to prove fraud and recoup the funds. Sue them? I had exactly $400 left in my checking account. Civil litigation would cost tens of thousands of dollars and take years to resolve. I was legally suffocated, financially destroyed, and technically homeless. I spent 2 months living out of the back of my Honda Civic, showering at a cheap local gym before dragging myself to my logistics job. The shame was absolute and crushing. Every night, huddled under a thin blanket in a dark parking garage, I would look at the photos of Barbara and Kevin posting updates about their glorious new family estate. The mega mansion was a monstrosity of columns and marble, purchased entirely with my stolen blood money. They threw lavish housewarming parties while I counted quarters for a cup of black coffee. The betrayal was a physical ache, a heavy stone sitting constantly in my chest. I realized then that justice wasn't something handed out freely by the universe. It was something you had to buy or forcefully take. So, I made a silent, unbreakable vow in the freezing dark of my car. I blocked their numbers. I deleted my social media. I completely severed every single tie to my toxic bloodline. I decided right then and there that Barbara and Kevin were utterly dead to me. I wouldn't waste my energy crying over people who viewed me as prey. I was going to survive, and then I was going to conquer. I disappeared from their world to build an empire of my own. The next 5 years were a grueling, unglamorous masterclass in sheer survival and calculated ambition. I didn't just work. I waged war against my own poverty. I picked up a second job waiting tables at night, funneling every spare dollar into high-yield investments and quietly studying commercial real estate. I lived like a ghost, residing in a tiny, cramped studio apartment with peeling paint, eating rice and beans, and wearing thrift store clothes. I operated completely under the radar. No one from my past knew where I lived or what I was doing. During this intense period of isolation and rebuilding, I met Leo. He was a financial analyst who frequented the diner where I worked the closing shift. Leo was sharp, intensely pragmatic, and fiercely protective. When I finally broke down and told him the entire horrifying saga of my stolen house and my family's betrayal, he didn't offer empty platitudes. He offered a massive spreadsheet. Leo became my partner in every sense of the word. Together, we pooled our resources. He taught me how to aggressively leverage my logistics background into a highly lucrative supply chain consulting business. We worked back-to-back at our small dining table, pulling 80-hour weeks until our eyes blurred. The money started rolling in, slowly at first, and then in massive, cascading waves. While Barbara and Kevin were busy bleeding their stolen equity dry on expensive cars and designer clothes, Leo and I were quietly amassing a formidable, ironclad fortune. We established a complex network of anonymous LLCs to hold our assets, ensuring my name would never appear on a public registry for my family to find. I healed the trauma of my past by building an absolute fortress of financial security. I was a millionaire by the time I turned 31, but I still drove my beat-up Honda. We remained silent, patient, and completely invisible. We were a loaded gun waiting for a target. I had the money, but I was still waiting for the perfect opportunity. The first crack in their pristine facade appeared quite unexpectedly on a lazy Sunday morning. Leo and I were drinking coffee when I casually scrolled through a local business journal on my tablet. A familiar, arrogant face suddenly stopped my finger dead on the screen. It was an article about a massive, high-profile bankruptcy. Kevin's supposed revolutionary tech startup had completely imploded under the immense weight of gross mismanagement and fraudulent investor claims. According to the article, Kevin was facing a barrage of civil lawsuits, and his assets were completely frozen. I felt a sharp, dangerous thrill run down my spine. The stolen money was finally running out. I immediately started digging, utilizing the deep investigative skills I had honed over the years. I paid for comprehensive background checks and pulled public court records. The financial picture I uncovered was absolutely disastrous. Not only was Kevin completely broke, but Barbara was drowning in toxic debt. She had taken out 2 massive, high-interest secondary mortgages on the mega mansion to fund Kevin's failing business and maintain her own lavish country club lifestyle. Her credit cards were maxed out. She was dodging aggressive debt collectors, and several local contractors had placed heavy mechanics liens on the estate for unpaid renovation work. The reality was stark. They were bleeding out financially, desperately trying to keep up appearances while the wolves aggressively circled their front door. Have you ever watched a house of cards slowly begin to collapse in slow motion? It is incredibly intoxicating. For years, they had paraded around in their stolen castle, believing themselves completely untouchable. They had assumed that my money would last forever, that their terrible choices would never catch up to them. But mathematics is a cruel and unforgiving master. The interest rates were devouring them alive. The walls of their stolen kingdom were finally starting to crumble down around them. I became totally obsessed, tracking their public financial ruin with the clinical precision of a predatory hawk circling its prey. I set up automated alerts for every legal filing associated with Barbara's name and the mansion's specific address. For weeks, it was just minor lawsuits and aggressive creditor judgments. Then, on a random Tuesday afternoon, exactly 6 years to the day since I had been locked out of my own starter home, the ultimate notification pinged brightly on my computer screen. It was a massive PDF document from the county clerk's office, a formal notice of default and intention to sell. The bank had finally lost its patience. Barbara had missed 7 consecutive mortgage payments on the sprawling estate, and the lenders were aggressively moving to foreclose. The document listed the outstanding debt, the astronomical late fees, and the absolute final date to cure the default. She didn't have a fraction of the cash required to save it. If the debt wasn't paid within 30 days, the $3 million mega mansion would be forcibly auctioned off to the highest bidder on the very steps of the county courthouse. I sat staring at the glowing monitor, my heart pounding a frantic, victorious rhythm against my ribs. The sheer, poetic justice of the situation was almost too perfect to believe. The universe had neatly packaged my revenge and delivered it directly to my inbox. They had stolen my modest home to buy this ostentatious monster, and now, a bank was going to rip it violently from their greedy hands. They were about to experience the exact same terrifying, helpless displacement they had so coldly inflicted upon me. I printed the official foreclosure notice, the heavy black ink warm from the printer, and laid it carefully on the dining table for Leo to see. The moment I showed him the paper, a very dangerous idea began to form. When Leo got home from the office, I didn't say a single word. I simply slid the printed foreclosure notice across the granite kitchen island. He picked it up, his analytical eyes scanning the legal jargon and the astronomical dollar amounts. He looked up at me, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. "So," Leo murmured, tapping the paper, "they are finally losing the castle." We sat down with our laptops and a bottle of expensive red wine, aggressively running the numbers. The auction starting bid was set at $1. $2 million, a steep discount from the property's actual market value, but enough to clear the bank's primary lien. We had 3 times that amount sitting comfortably in liquid assets across our various LLCs. The moral dilemma weighed heavily in the silent room. I could just sit back, do absolutely nothing, and watch them plummet gracefully into bankruptcy from afar. It would be safe. It would be totally clean. But as I closed my eyes, I didn't see safety. I saw the smug, condescending look on Barbara's face when she told me to stop being dramatic. I heard Kevin laughing as I stood shivering in the freezing rain. If an anonymous investor bought the house, my family would just play the tragic victims, complaining to anyone who would listen about their terrible luck and the cruel, unfair banking system. They would never take true accountability. I looked at Leo, the fire of absolute certainty burning brightly in my chest. "I don't just want them to fall," I said, my voice eerily calm and resolute. "I want to be the solid concrete floor they smash into. I want to buy it." Leo didn't hesitate. He simply nodded, opening a new spreadsheet. We began wiring massive funds into our primary real estate holding company. We were going to buy my family's stolen mansion completely out from under them. The county courthouse steps were swarming with aggressive real estate sharks and institutional flippers when Leo and I arrived on the morning of the auction. The air was thick with tension and the smell of cheap coffee. I wore a large pair of dark sunglasses and a wide-brimmed hat, completely terrified that Barbara might actually show up to witness the grim spectacle of her own ruin. But true to her cowardly nature, she was nowhere to be seen. Agent Thorne, a completely emotionless, gray-suited foreclosure auctioneer, stood at the podium with a thick stack of manila folders. When he finally called out the address of the mega mansion, my pulse skyrocketed. The bidding opened strictly at $1. $2 million. Immediately, 3 different corporate investors raised their paddles, aggressively driving the price up in rapid $50,000 increments. 1.5, a man in a sharp blue suit called out. 1.6, Leo countered calmly, holding up the paddle registered to our anonymous holding company, Apex Holdings LLC. The blue suit glared at us and fired back. The bidding war was fierce and rapid, pushing past the 1.8 million mark. My palms were sweating profusely, leaving damp prints on my designer handbag. I grabbed Leo's arm, squeezing it tightly. "Don't let him have it," I whispered frantically. "Whatever it takes." Leo gave a curt nod and raised the paddle high. 2.1 million, he declared, his voice ringing clearly across the crowded courtyard. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the gathered investors. The blue suit angrily shook his head and folded his arms. Agent Thorne scanned the crowd with cold, dead eyes. "Going once. Going twice. Sold to Apex Holdings LLC for $2.1 million. The heavy wooden gavel slammed down with a deeply satisfying crack. The deed was ours. I had successfully purchased the ultimate instrument of my vengeance. I legally owned the roof currently sitting over my mother's deeply treacherous head. Securing the final deed from the county was only the first part of the brutal war. As the legal owner under Apex Holdings LLC, I had my high-powered real estate attorney serve the official 3-day notice to quit directly to the mansion. I expected them to pack their bags quietly in the dead of night and flee in utter disgrace. I should have known better. My family's profound entitlement was a terminal disease. Instead of vacating the premises, Barbara hired a sleazy, low-budget defense lawyer to aggressively stall the eviction process. She filed completely frivolous hardship extensions, claiming she needed more time to relocate her valuable antiquities. But the most infuriating part came a week later, when her lawyer contacted our LLC with a bold proposition. Barbara and Kevin were flatly refusing to leave the property unless the faceless corporate buyers paid them a massive cash for keys settlement. They literally demanded $50,000 in crisp cash just to hand over the house they no longer legally owned, threatening to completely trash the luxurious interior if the LLC refused to comply. I sat in my lawyer's plush downtown office, reading the extortion demand, completely vibrating with sheer, unadulterated rage. They were still trying to con people. Even in the absolute depths of their devastating ruin, they were still violently grasping for unearned money. My attorney sighed, tapping his gold pen on the mahogany desk. "It's a standard squatter tactic," he explained calmly. "Paying them is often cheaper and faster than a protracted legal battle and repairing extensive property damage." I stared out the window at the sprawling city skyline, a dark, dangerous smile slowly spreading across my face. I wasn't going to fight them in court. I was going to use their insatiable greed to trap them. I instructed my attorney to formally accept their ridiculous cash for keys extortion demand. The plan was meticulously crafted to ensure maximum psychological devastation. Through my attorney, Apex Holdings LLC sent a formal, binding agreement to Barbara's legal representation. We explicitly agreed to the absurd $50,000 cash for keys settlement, but we attached one highly specific, non-negotiable condition. The exchange had to happen completely in person, directly inside the mansion's grand foyer, at exactly 9 a.m. on a Saturday. The LLC's principal owner would personally inspect the property to ensure no malicious damage had occurred before handing over the certified cashier's check. Barbara, completely blinded by the desperate prospect of easy money, enthusiastically agreed to the terms. She probably thought she had brilliantly outsmarted some foolish, faceless corporate entity. She spent the entire week packing up her designer clothes and bragging to her remaining high society friends about the brilliant payout she had aggressively negotiated. She had absolutely no idea that she was willingly walking into a meticulously designed execution chamber. The night before the final meeting, I barely slept a wink. I stood in my massive walk-in closet, carefully selecting my armor for the impending battle. I chose a sleek, impeccably tailored black designer suit, sharp stiletto heels, and minimal jewelry. I wanted to look completely untouchable, a stark, glaring contrast to the broke, desperate girl they had so cruelly cast out into the freezing rain 7 years ago. Leo stood in the bedroom doorway, watching me with a mixture of intense pride and slight concern. "Are you absolutely sure you want to do this face-to-face?" he asked softly. "I can just send the lawyer with the sheriff." I turned to him, my expression entirely devoid of mercy. "They need to see exactly whose money they stole," I replied. The trap was fully set, and the oblivious rats were waiting for the cheese. Saturday morning dawned crisp and bitterly cold. I pulled my sleek black Mercedes SUV directly into the sprawling circular driveway of the mega mansion, the tires crunching loudly on the imported gravel. Right behind me, a heavily marked county sheriff's cruiser rolled to a halt. Sheriff Miller stepped out, a thick stack of official eviction documents gripped firmly in his hands. I took a deep, steadying breath, feeling the absolute power radiating through my veins. I marched up those pristine marble steps, the sharp click of my stilettos echoing like a ticking clock against the heavy stone. I didn't knock. I pressed the ornate brass doorbell and waited. The custom mahogany double doors swung open, revealing Barbara. She was wearing her signature silk robe, a fake, sickly sweet customer service smile plastered tightly across her perfectly contoured face. She was fully prepared to charm a wealthy corporate representative. Kevin stood right behind her, looking aggressively impatient. For 3 agonizing seconds, absolute silence blanketed the grand foyer. Barbara's eyes slowly registered my face. The fake smile violently shattered, instantly replaced by a mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. She physically stumbled backward, her hand flying up to cover her mouth. "Sophia," she gasped, her voice trembling with a terrifying realization. Kevin's jaw dropped to the marble floor, his arrogant smirk instantly evaporating into thin air. "What the hell are you doing here?" he stammered, frantically looking past me to the uniformed police officer standing ominously on the porch. I stepped aggressively across the threshold, my expensive heels sinking into the plush Persian rug. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I looked them completely dead in the eyes, my voice dripping with absolute, freezing contempt. "I'm not your landlord, Mom. I'm your eviction notice." I held up the certified deed proving I was the sole owner of their reality. The resulting psychological meltdown was absolute, unadulterated chaos. Barbara completely lost her mind. She fell to her knees right there in the grand foyer, violently sobbing and aggressively grabbing at the hem of my designer suit. "Sophia, please. You can't do this to us. We are family. I am your mother," she wailed, her pristine blowout quickly dissolving into a frantic, messy tangle. "You have all this money now. You can just let us stay? Have some compassion." I calmly stepped back, physically peeling her desperate fingers off my expensive clothing. "Compassion?" I asked, my voice echoing coldly off the vaulted ceiling. "Did you have compassion when you forged my signature? Did you have compassion when I was sleeping in a freezing Honda Civic?" Kevin, meanwhile, completely bypassed sadness and went straight into a blind, pathetic rage. "You deceitful bitch," he screamed, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. "You set us up. I'm going to sue you for everything you own." Sheriff Miller immediately stepped forward, his hand resting heavily on his taser. "Sir, you need to lower your voice and step back immediately," the officer commanded sternly. I pulled the fake $50,000 cash for keys contract from my briefcase and slowly ripped it into tiny pieces, letting the confetti violently flutter onto their imported rugs. "There is no settlement money," I stated flatly, watching their last shred of hope completely die. "You have exactly 1 hour to gather whatever you can carry in garbage bags. Anything left inside this house belongs to Apex Holdings LLC." The reality of their absolute ruin finally crushed them. They scrambled frantically like terrified rats, stuffing their cheap designer knockoffs into black plastic trash bags while the sheriff watched their every move. I stood in the center of the mansion, finally breathing the sweet air of victory. I stood perfectly still on the marble porch, silently watching the 2 people who had destroyed my 20s drag their black garbage bags down the long, winding driveway. They didn't have a moving truck. They didn't have a plan. They just had the heavy, crushing weight of their own catastrophic consequences. Barbara looked back at me one final time, her eyes completely devoid of the arrogant superiority that had defined her entire existence. I didn't offer a wave. I just locked the heavy mahogany doors and walked away. I never lived in that ostentatious mega mansion. The very next day, Leo and I hired a massive crew to completely gut the interior, violently erasing every single trace of my toxic family's existence. We flipped the property in 6 months, selling it to a wealthy tech executive for a massive, multi-million-dollar profit. The money we made from the sale went directly into funding a brand new commercial real estate venture. I wish I could say that destroying them magically healed all the deep, agonizing wounds in my soul. It didn't. Revenge is incredibly satisfying in the moment, but it is ultimately just a hollow echo. True healing came from the beautiful, quiet life Leo and I built together, entirely free from the suffocating poison of their manipulation. My final piece of advice to anyone reading this is stark and simple. Blood does not automatically equal loyalty. Protect your financial assets with absolute, ruthless aggression. Lock down your credit. Read every single line of paperwork before you sign, and never underestimate the desperate greed of the people who claim to love you the most. Sometimes, the only way to truly survive a burning bridge is to be the one holding the match.